I want you to know who you have in front of you, because they are the true believers in what it means to have the community own that school. So I'm going to start with Alonzo
Yes.
Blankenship, who is a teacher at Webb Early College Preparatory Academy. He is a teacher leader in Austin, Texas. We have some folks from Austin here today, yes, and Texas. Alonzo, why community schools? Why do you even want to teach in a community school?
Yes, thank you so much. And I definitely appreciate being here, being able to share from my perspective as a teacher. I would say from the positionality of a teacher, I'm the main one in the classroom able to see the lives of students. You know, students come to the classroom with so many different needs, and they share personal stories with teachers about their lived experiences. So I hear those stories, and there was one particular story where a student told me that he hates his life. And so being a teacher, how do you address that? What do you say about responding to students that raise those particular concerns? And it's not only concerns, of self-hatred, but it's so many other concerns about mobility, concerns with parents that leave, their kids, and their kids are struggling, to try to survive in, such a world that's really against them sometimes. So with the Community Schools Initiative, it just shows us that there's something that you can do about those needs. It creates this climate and culture in which teachers can thrive, a culture of hope, a culture of connectedness to the community. And just with this idea of teachers not having to take the burden on themselves, but knowing that there is support for them, it's a shared leadership approach. It just really helped me out, in terms of meeting the needs of the students. I come from a background, too, where I've taught in a school that wasn't a community school. And just comparing it with a community school, I see the difference in the outcomes, not only the academic, but the civic, and also the social, emotional outcomes of the students.
I'm glad you mentioned social, emotional.
Absolutely, and that's a huge component, in terms of...
Appreciate Alonzo's commitment. Amy, I forgot to have you practice your last name with me. Let's see if I get it right. Mizialko. Wow, my phonics skills are so good. And Amy is a special education teacher for 24 years and is one of our union leaders in the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. Yay. And Amy, what does it mean to you to be teaching in a community school?
Thank you, Lily. So I think for Milwaukee, we're about community schools because we're about our students and our families. And here today are the 4 of our community schools, our Hopkins, Lloyd, Bradley Tech, and JMAC. And as union vice president, I think our union is particularly hopeful about community schools, about public community schools for our city, because like many cities here, our students and neighborhoods and families have been starved of basic resources, they've been over-tested, they've been punished, and then they've been told that they are failures. And in Milwaukee, our students are not failures. Our families are not failures. They have endless potential when given opportunity. So the community schools approach used the word hope. Simply said, I think that this model, this approach has the potential to bring real liberation, real justice, real equity inside of our classrooms and in our communities as a whole. So I think that possibility is what keeps Milwaukee educators, Milwaukee families, our elected Milwaukee Public School Board committed to and focused on what is possible for our kids.
I love the words you used: justice, liberation. Wow. So no child left untested. Wow. Very cool. Raul Sanchez. Oh, give it up for Amy. Yay. First in your college to graduate from a university, first in your family, immigrant parents, de Mexico. And
the youngest of 14.
you had to throw that youngest thing in there, right?
Had me.
Okay, why not? I'm not the youngest anything anymore. But you are the principal at the school that Alonso teaches at. And when we were talking at lunch, just a great believer in shared leadership. We don't hear a lot of principals talking about sharing their authority. You seem very, very comfortable with that. What's it like sharing your authority, your leadership at your school?
Let me start by giving you a context of where I work. And I guess that'll help kind of show you where and why we take the approach that we do. We are in the inner city part of Austin, ISD. We service almost 800 students, 100% low-income families, African American, Latino families. Almost 30%, 25% initially of our kids were very mobile because of living standards being what they were, and so they were being displaced. Children came from, a third of them were coming from single-parent households, and so there's a number of issues that the kids bring to the table. And as principal, as you know, we're held to the expectation that we need to perform and that our students have to pass their exams and our teachers have to do well. So I can foolishly pretend to do it all by myself. And although my last name is Sanchez, I don't bear an S in front of me. I can't do this by myself. And so I had to depend on the people around me. I work very closely with a lot of agencies. There are 20 outside agencies that work with me. There's the Austin Voices organization that supports us in everything that we do. We work very closely with United Way. And so for me, it's common sense. I've been that child. I lived it. I lived in poverty. My parents are not educated. And so I can relate to my families. And so I have a responsibility not only to educate, but to provide a service, a wraparound service for my families and my community, to accept them for who they are, to celebrate them, and then to challenge them to think beyond a standardized test, to prepare them for college and to let them know my story and to instill in them that possibility that college is within their reach. It's just whether they want to work for it or not. And so that's our drive at our school.
And you're at a middle school.
We are currently 6th through 8th, but soon to be K through 8th.
Wow. So when you say preparing your kids for college, you're at the beginning of that pipeline, not waiting till they're 10th graders or 11th graders.
Correct. So there's a very active effort on my part to work very closely with Reagan High School, who's an early college high school, and that we went through we were on the verge of closure in 2006, and so the community came to the rescue of our school, and the same thing happened to Reagan High School. And so in an effort to try to save and revitalize the community, but then to bring about change in the work that we did, we had to depend on the community to tell us what it is, how it was that they perceived our school. And then more importantly, what they felt we needed to do with our children and the instruction that we were providing our kids. And so because we knew that we had to deliver our kids and surrender them at the end of their 8th grade year to an early college high school, it made perfect sense that we would do everything within our reach and everything within our power to prepare these kids with the necessary credits, the necessary instruction that was going to get them ready so that they can take on and then ultimately graduate with an associate's degree when they finished high school.
Wow. Let's give it up for Raul. And Doug Jones, Doug, I'm looking at your bio, and it says you're trained in social work as a sociologist, a counselor. You've worked in early childhood ed, adult education, active in the Girl Scouts. I love that part. And when I said, "So what's your role?" At first you said, "I'm a bureaucrat," and that's that just sounds so harsh. But you're someone who gives bureaucrat a good name because it takes someone to administer all of this and bring all of those parties together. Tell me why you believe in community schools and your role in community schools.
Thank you. Well, in Kentucky, back in 1990, there was a lawsuit, and there was an issue with inequity, with physical issues, as well as the social, emotional, and trying to care for the children in the state because of poverty. We used to say thank you to a couple of states because we were 47th in the country. And as a result, now we're 27th and top 9 for graduation rates. At that time, after having been in higher education as well and private business, I've done everything, I guess. I'm old, so a veteran, I guess. But I wasn't really looking for a job, but I was very involved with the lawsuit that was involved because as a parent. And so I remember the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence, which is 100 members in the state, and what actually was the result of the lawsuit. So as a result, they declared that the state of Kentucky's education system was done for. They legislated for equity and fiscal responsibilities and formed family resource youth service centers. The first year, I was one of the original coordinators. I had 5 different elementary schools over a period of 6 years. And then I've been regional manager with the State Department of Education and the Cabinet for Health and Services, which is a partnership, a collaborative. So I believe in the program because I experienced the program. I was there from day one. We've now been in existence we're celebrating our 25th year of changing lives. I loved when you used bridging barriers because that's been our mantra since day one. But basically, our centers, we now have 831 centers, which will be considered community schools, serving 1,100 schools in the state of Kentucky. And not only do they serve families by strengthening them and the children in the schools, but we truly have been the catalyst for changing the communities by bringing all stakeholders to the table, providing wraparound services. And now we focus from the cradle to the grave because we started out, home visits are critical. So I enjoy all of these aspects of trying to, empower families and students rather than enabling them.
Well, good for you, Doug. Let's hear it for Doug. Wow. So you can see our panelists are the folks that are on the ground making it work, no ivory towers. I'm going to ask Amy, because one of the words that jumped out at you when we were having lunch was the word trust. As I've talked to some folks about the community school concept, they think that it's putting a health clinic next to the principal's office. Or, it's like, oh, well, you just put these wraparound services and then you knock out some walls and there, voila, you have a community school. You were talking about how important an attribute like trust is if it's going to be a real community school. Explain what you meant.
I think you have identified one of the primary obstacles oftentimes when folks come to the idea of community schools and are grappling with, well, what is it and what does it mean? And if we're really visioning in an unlimited way with our communities and with our families and students, then, as I mentioned earlier, then we're looking for opportunities for transformation and liberation within classrooms and within communities. And I would assert that we will only get to that place if we are honest and truthful about the foundational imperative of trust, and trust in a couple of ways. So we were talking earlier about really teaching for the past 10, 12, 14 years, for most public school teachers has become an act of oftentimes compliance and obedience, because teachers have been caught within this test and punish cycle that you mentioned earlier. So teachers and administrators as well, caught in that cycle, that has certainly diminished in many times the opportunity for trust. But the other trust piece, and I appreciated, Raul, what you were talking about with asking the honest question of parents and families, like how do you feel when you're in our building, and what do you think of us, and what do we need to know? When communities like Milwaukee, communities living in poverty, generational poverty, who've been disrespected and marginalized and discounted and put aside, and we expect communities to trust us? So to really, I agree with you, this can be the revolution. This is a movement, it's clear. But that will take being incredibly honest, and it will take listening, and it will take being curious instead of making assumptions about people and what we think we know about parents and families, or what we think we know about our communities.
Alonso, I was looking at some of the work that you're doing, and I want to go back to the theme about it's more than just attaching some wraparound services to your facility, because you are involved in an incredible academic program. Not only do you want to care for these children's health, their safety, their well-being, inclusive of their parents, but you're saying, I want them to fly. I want them to soar. I want them to have their eyes open to new possibilities intellectually, and what their academic lives could be like. Talk to me a little bit about how you do that. What's the collaboration that you have with your colleagues, or is it something that you just develop on your own?
So being within this community school environment, I see just how, I'm more so of a researcher, and being a teacher, you definitely have to be a researcher, looking at your students, trying to identify, what's going on. In terms of instruction, and what we do to create this instructional program, in which students can succeed, it takes a lot more than just the teachers in the school. It does take, the community to come together. And what we do at Webb, and what we do very well, is we have meetings where these different community partners can come to the table, where it's not just the school creating the campus improvement plan by themselves, but parents, families. We have Education Austin under the direction of Ken Zarafis, Austin Voices for Education and Youth under the direction of Alan Weeks. They all come to the table, and basically we plan out, what do we see from these various perspectives of how, students can achieve, like how the school can be successful. There's a quote by Margaret Wheatley, and she says that people support what they help to create. So if people don't come to the table, to help create these plans, then there is that lack of relational trust. When people are not given the opportunities for their voices to be heard, or not given the opportunities to share their stories. I was part of a leadership learning exchange yesterday where they talked about the importance of sharing your stories and how that brings healing, how that brings that sense of relational trust. So with all of these partners coming to the table to help create the educational program, to help create different opportunities, such as opportunities for students to go to a college campus, take trips, to familiarize themselves with the area outside of their own zip code, just all of those. So I definitely rely on the partnership and the program with that, it's more informed and it's more organic, if you will.
I was struck too by some of the statistics in our most challenged communities. And Amy, it goes back to what you were saying about you can't just wave a magic wand and go, now trust us, especially in communities that have sometimes seen children who are in high poverty, high minority communities where the school became a school to prison pipeline because of very harsh discipline procedures that were used that seemed to be disproportionately used for poor and minority students. And so I want to ask Raul, in your school, which is a middle school, how do you deal with things like positive discipline so that you don't fall into what some folks blindly, they don't even see it themselves, that they are treating different students in a different way. They have different expectations. How do you become very conscious about having, so that you have the trust of the community, the trust of the students, when you have to have a discipline procedure? Talk to me about how you build that character for children.
So at Webb Middle School, one of the things that we opted to do was study our data and look at not just the number of children that we were displacing from classrooms, suspensions, ISS, whatever. It was also looking at the perceived. We had a perception in our school that we believed that we were meeting the needs of our kids. But when we surveyed our parents and when we surveyed our students, the outcome was obvious in that we thought we were doing it well, but data was telling us differently. In our school, we have approximately 9% of our students that are African American. The rest of them are Latinos. And yet, in our school, with only 68 students who were African American, those 68 students were being displaced from their classroom for OSS and ISS 1/3 of the time. So we couldn't ignore what the data was telling us. So one of the things that I realized that I needed to do was I could go to teachers and ask them to be more flexible with students and give them the data, but unless you help them understand what's really truly happening and you uncover, if you will, the beast, then it's just words, it's rhetoric. So one of the things that we launched in our school was, we needed to have multiple levels of people that were involved in changing culture. And when you change culture, this is not an event, it's a process. That's right. And so one of the things that we decided to do, and it started 3 years ago, was to have a book study, and we all read it. And in fact, Alonzo, I believe you were a part of that as well. And I had all my administrators, I've got 3 assistant principals, my counselors, teacher leaders, parents, and we all read this book. It was called Everyday Anti-Racism. And it was the premise to our discussion to begin having these talks of what we truly felt, because sometimes we have a perception that, well, I don't see color. Well, we learned in our meetings that, I want you to see my color because I'm proud of being Latino. And we had that discussion about African American folks who said, you know what, I know that I'm black and I want you to see that I'm black, and I'm proud of that. And I want you to celebrate my heritage and my culture, and you can't ignore that. And in fact, in our instruction, in our teaching, you have to have authentic opportunities for my kids to see themselves in what we're studying, because if they don't see it, then they don't want to learn. So we began a number of different initiatives in our school. We developed this book study, but it became we really revamped our entire administrative plan on how we were going to address this issue of disciplining students. Teachers were a part of that. Our ISS was eliminated. It wasn't eliminated indefinitely. What we did was we reclassified and we named it a personal responsibility center, but that personal responsibility center became a place where we got people who were advocates in helping students in social emotional learning areas, who were going to be coming into those areas and having students reflect on what they were doing that was wrong, allowing them to reflect on the decisions that they were making that were affecting them as well. And then we also developed a plan that gave us alternative methods of disciplining students. Having parents give us permission to have students, stay after school for detentions. I launched this thing that kids hated that started right after school at 3:30, but kept them for 2 hours, from 3:30 to 5:30.
But you had parents
Parents were
buy
involved.
into that.
And then the other thing is, they weren't just sitting, restlessly in a room. We got them involved in a program like the VPO program, which is a volunteer project leadership program, where students were going into their community and they were having to, if you will, do community service so that they can then take ownership and then develop even their self-esteem. So there were a number of restorative practices that we were embedding within our plan that was revolutionizing the way we were doing things in our school.
And if I could add to that,
You bet.
Definitely having after school and allowing time to be able to have conversations with kids, that's an additive. It's definitely an additive model. We want kids to be problem solvers. We want them to learn how to see a situation. Even though you may have done something wrong, what are you going to do next? And that's what matters, for the kids. So just having those conversations, we as teachers, with the knowledge, with more life history, we need to be able to instill, kind of impart what we know, and that can only be done through those conversations with students. So like Sanchez was mentioning, revamping the ISS system, when you're taking students out of the classroom and they're just going to a place where they're just sitting there, they're not learning anything. We teach math, we teach social studies, all the core subjects, and we reteach, we provide opportunities, but also with students to learn all of those social aspects, you have to teach that as well.
We have, I can't believe, run out of time. And there's been a wonderful person sitting up here holding up signs. You don't know that I can't see a thing.
Yeah.
I see a little piece of white paper. I think you're just surrendering. But I do see someone standing over there going like this. And so that's my message, yes, that we have. What I want Doug to do is to have the last word. And just what would be the parting, as the person that brings the community together, one last thought for our group on how to welcome those partners.
I think I would probably say that our schools are just as good as what our communities and what our teachers and what our parents and collaborative partners are. Because it starts with the custodians, the cafeteria workers, the teachers, the principals, the aides in the school, the community school coordinator. It truly is a collaborative, and if we want to have improving schools, it has got to be based upon that relationship that's built with the students and knowing that they are an important part of the lives. And that's how I think that we can transform our struggling schools into thriving schools.
These are the people that are making it happen just like you. Let's give it up and appreciate our panel.